True. Let's go to Karma Green, we steady on the rise. Digging truth from ancient scenes, we open blinded eyes. Rhyme sharp like pirates' lines, we break the bondage tight. Kamji speaking revolution, keep the fire burning. Chimpy drums guide our stride, we march with purpose proud. No more silence, we collide, our voices thunder loud. Politics and history, we stitch them in every verse. From Pharaoh's throne to Yaoundé streets, we claim the Kamji verse.
You are listening to Black Agenda Radio. I'm Margaret Kimberley. Netfa Freeman and I are among the co-coordinators of the Black Alliance for Peace Africa team. He is also an organizer in the Washington-based Pan-African Community Action, PACA, and co-host producer of the WPFW radio show and podcast, Voices with Vision. He joins us from Washington to discuss the Black Alliance for Peace 5th Annual International Month of Action against Africom. What is Africom? What impact does it have here in the U.S.? Netfa Freeman provides us with analysis. Welcome back, Netfa, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Margaret.
Well, let's start off talking about the U.S. Africa Command, Africom. What is it, and why does the Black Alliance for Peace Africa team host this series of events?
Africom, the U.S. Africa Command, is the command center. It's one of 11 U.S. military commands that are created to assert U.S. military domination around the world. It coordinates and streamlines the operations, U.S. military operations, and all types of things that the U.S. military does on the African continent. It was begun formalized in around 2007 to 2008, first under the Bush administration, and then at a time when a lot of the African countries were not accepting it and were rejecting it. I mean, mostly seemed because it was Bush offering it. But when Barack Obama became president of the United States, it seemed to be able to proliferate. So the country that didn't have any Africom relationships with was Eritrea, which stays in the crosshairs of U.S. imperialism. But also, recently the countries of Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali have ended their relationship with Africom. And the origin of Africom goes a little bit further back and is maybe more an outgrowth of the Eurocom, which was how the United States had been, the U.S. Military command centers in Europe. And so how U.S. had been coordinating its Africa operations there. And that the commander of Eurocom saw fit to actually establish a specific one for Africa, the Africom. Now, the Black Alliance for Peace focuses on Africom because, in our beginnings, we came to oppose U.S. militarism as one of the major aspects of imperialism that needs to be exposed and needs to be confronted, and that there was very little understanding and knowledge about Africom and also the U.S. military operations on the African continent, U.S. military adventures, or whatever you want to call them, pursuits on the African continent. And so we wanted to raise that up, and that's what we've been doing. And so, in fact, it was our focus on Africom that led to the creation in BAP of the Africa team, and then also our U.S. Out of Africa network, which is the organizing arm of the campaign. Stop U.S. Out of Africa, shut down Africom, and which that network has a steering committee of organizations of revolutionary to radical parties and formations on the African continent that inform our work and give us the understanding on the ground from what's happening on the ground. This year's theme and we've been doing this for 5 years. So this year is the 5th International Month of Action against Africom, under the theme now, the 21st century neocolonialism, capitalism, compradors, and the ongoing scramble for Africa. And that theme is to highlight the fact that neocolonialism in 21st century neocolonialism is a stage and a phase of capitalist development. It's a phase of imperialism. Actually, Kwame Nkrumah elaborated on it as the last resort of imperialism, the last phase of imperialism. And so what we're seeing now is Africom being really what the imperialists have no other resort. They've already done, used as much as they can the The comprador classes, those African elites that serve the interests of the foreign powers, but ostensibly represent themselves as representing the interests of the African people. So that's compradors, and we see that the comprador class really are the ones who open the back door for imperialism. Now that there's this flag independence, we were after formal colonization and direct colonization and even settler colonialism on the continent of Africa. You have the independence movements granted. We were granted independence, what we refer to as flag independence, meaning that now the countries and the different nations that the Europe made around Africa are able to have their own flag, but that's about it. We don't really control the politics and the economics of their country. And so the compradors open the back door for us not to be able to control. When I say us, I'm referring to all African people. I identify as an African. Those of us who are Pan-Africanists identify as Africans no matter where we are in the world. But the compradors open the back door, and so they become an impediment to us being able to chart courses for self-determination and independence. And then we refer to in the theme the ongoing scramble for Africa, because we know that the role that the continent plays in Africa is a major source of raw minerals. It is a major source of markets for Western European powers and imperialist powers to exploit, and then also of labor, of cheap labor in so many ways. And so that plunder of Africa that has kept Africa under development continues, and that now as a reordering, a realigning of or shifting of major powers in the world, how things are, the multipolarity or multilateralism that has weakened Western imperialism, there's now this new scramble trying to assert itself. In fact, the reason for Africom that they state is because a competition, particularly with China and China's influence on the continent of Africa. So that's how we're dealing with the campaign right now. That's the theme of the campaign and the origins of Africom.
Black Alliance for Peace, regional organizations and citywide alliances are holding a series of events, have been throughout the month of October, starting with a kickoff webinar on October 4th, which can be seen on the Black Alliance for Peace YouTube channel. And as I said, continuing throughout the month. There are teach-ins, banner drops, a variety of actions. What is it that you're hoping to achieve with these events?
Yeah, so it is like you reminded me, it's an international month of action against Africom. So we kick off the first week of the month with the webinar, and also gathering endorsers, organizations, people who endorse the month of action. So on the page, blackallianceforpeace.com/Africom 2025, and it's also on the homepage. You will be able to see the endorsement flyer and click on it, and then also the endorsement link, and then fill that out. And then we outline a number of things that we're suggesting and hoping people do throughout the month, and they're also providing tools for them to do it. So we had the kickoff webinar, and that first week, that, as you said, October 4th. And on that day, not only did we have the kickoff webinar, a number of citywide alliances of the Black Alliance for Peace held watch parties. So what we were referred to as watch parties. So they were organized for gatherings in the community where people would be able to watch the webinar together and then hold discussions about it afterwards. The second week, we're asking people to do teach-ins, and these things don't have to be done in this order. It's just a guide to where, to help people do it. And if we can kind of have some uniformity in how we do things, it's a bit more impressive. It makes a bigger impact. So teach-ins throughout the world, really, because it's International Month of Africom, and we have toolkits for people to do teach-ins, modules, suggested things that can be adapted to suit other people, suit the needs of the folks in a particular location. And then week 3, we're calling for mass actions such as banner drops. Banner drops is a easy and impressive way to kind of agitate and shake up things, where you create a big banner and find a high visible place and drop the banner there. You could either leave it, for a time enough for, like, for example, an overpass over a highway or something like that, or where people can drive by and then they would see it. there's two ways we could do it. People ask all the time. Well, you can create something that's disposable that you don't care about. You create it, you paint it, and then you put it in this high visible place and just leave it and wait till authorities come and take it down. Or if something, maybe impressive that you might want to keep, you stand with it, you let it stay up there for a while. And then also do what I call giving it legs, where you have people designated to come to drive by on, as if their own, and take pictures of it or something, and then show this on social media and kind of do a lot of social media stuff. Now, that's just one action that we're suggesting, but we want people to be creative, and we're really trying to build, and this is the part of your question, a massive social movement, a massive movement for social justice that opposes and challenges the existence of Africom and sees it as part and parcel of challenging the movement against the global movement against imperialism around the world. And so that's what the purpose of the International Month of Action is. And so we also hope that people will start to do other types of direct action, challenging these policymakers, particularly those that are in the Congressional Black Caucus who really aid and abet Africom instead of doing, if they're working in our interests, exposing it. And one of the demands is the call for a investigation over the impacts of Africom, for them to do it, and then also to open that, investigate that, and hold hearings on it, and open those hearings up to new civil society, international civil society, about the impacts of it. The fourth week, we are asking people to share educational resources on social media and in your community. We have actually graphics that people can use throughout this month on that page, blackallianceforpeace.com/Africom 2025. And that those are the things we're asking people to do. And then we also are open, the Africa team can work with anybody, anywhere, to provide people to speak about Africom on panels or anything like that, on teach-ins. There's a teach-in module. I said that there's a toolkit on the page, one for teach-ins to help, suggest how you would create content for teaching, and also for a banner drop, how you do a banner drop, that kind of thing. And so there's a lot of toolkits there that we provide for people to use.
And often when we discuss foreign policy, there are people who say, well, what does that have to do with us here? Don't we have needs here? And that's true. But while that is true, that people have many needs to meet here, there are connections with what the U.S. does around the world. What is your response to those who ask, what does Africom have to do with me in the U.S.?
And there's a lot of responses to that. I think it's a very good question, because I think a lot of times the United States or U.S. imperialism has to obscure international connections, the interconnectivity between things internationally, and the interdependence of things internationally. So one, there's an exorbitant amount of money just spent on U.S. militarism. They spend hundreds of billions of dollars every year on a military budget, to the neglect of communities, and that this money could be going to the social needs. There's a lot of social needs, and the capitalist economy is really failing and is not able to provide for people. So it's really obscene, it's criminal to be spending so much money. And that for those of us, and particularly in the African community in the United States, the domestic colonies in the settler colonial, this country, we live in horrendous conditions. A lot of us, those of us who don't, the small number of us who don't get to make it into some other class comfort situation. And those conditions pose a threat to the status quo. They want us to stay in these conditions. This is not designed to do anything. So now, as the resources are hoarded and siphoned to other neoliberal type situations, they have to repress us. So what's happening on the African continent, where they're using Africom to prop up comprador leaders and puppet governments, and what the masses on the ground are up in arms about, protests in Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria, against corrupt leaders who are being supported through the United States and protected by Africom. We're doing the same thing. Same thing is happening to us here, that they've sent an international guard into our communities. predominantly African, or not predominantly African, but major cities that have large, significant African populations are being targeted. If we don't understand that we're an African people, and that we have, and the same system and the same structures that preside over the oppression that we face in the United States are the same as that is presiding over and keeping the plunder and exploitation of Africa going. We have to understand that in order to rise above it, and that it becomes an irony, a tragic irony, to think that we are distinct. What happens in Africa doesn't concern us, while the same forces deploy. People will join the U.S. military and say, well, I don't have any other, there's benefits there, there's this and that. And then when they deploy you to Africa, to fight some, fight in some situation that they're responsible for, like, in Niger. You may remember the year where this was like something like 2019 maybe, where the United States had the biggest drone base in Niger. Some people pronounce it Niger. And there's a drone base and some other base in Niger. They were building it, and it was spending millions of dollars on it, right? And then they had their troops there. The troops were deployed there, and then something happened. There was an incident where someone got killed. A number of the troops got killed. It was like 3 or something like that. In fact, one of them was from this area here in Washington, D.C., if I'm not mistaken. And when it happened, there had been a while so it made some major news, and then people were asking the question, what is the United States doing in Africa? They didn't know about Africom. They didn't know how pervasive it had been. And so the tragic irony is that we're being deployed to press our motherland, so to speak. I'm a Pan-Africanist. I think that Africa is my home, and that we have a common destiny, that liberation of Africa will impact the liberation or the conditions of African people everywhere in the world, because it becomes a power base, not only because it's rich in mineral resources and we should be able to have a kinship with our African family on the continent, such that those resources are used to develop and uplift the masses of people on the continent, but they can also be used. Africa is really abundant. They can all be used to uplift us in other places. Also, a united, liberated Africa, liberated from the fetters of things like Africom and other neocolonial impositions, the International Monetary Fund and World Bank and all that. A united Africa that sees us all as one can become a power block within the world to call for and enforce the treatment of us here within the bounds of the U.S. settler colonial state. And so it's only because the Africa's weak that as a political entity, only because Africa's weak that the African people in the United States are treated the way we are, and vice versa, because we're not organized as a people within the U.S. and imperialism, the bounds of imperialism, the capital of imperialism in the United States. Then also they can treat Africa, our motherland, our homeland, any kind of way. So it's an irony that we would disassociate ourselves. Africom serves to impose what others refer to, like what Malcolm referred to as Americanism, on us. We believe that we are Americans, that we share the same social, economic, political, and even cultural interests of America, where the disassociation from Africa was imposed on us as being kidnapped from Africa and forced here to be enslaved and work for nothing, and also impose an identity imposed on us, right? And that for us now to accept that imposition, what you could say Bob Marley referred to, the mental slavery, helps perpetuate the conditions of our African people wherever we are in the world. So now they want to escalate things by sending in National Guard and whatnot, and then they also at the same time have to intensify the militarism on the African continent. Niger, by the way, is one of the states that has formed, along with Burkina Faso and Mali, has formed a confederation, or at least an alliance of Sahel states, as it's commonly known, but also a confederation that is following back in the legacy of the movement for a united Africa. So they were able to throw out Africom. They kicked Africom out. And there was a time when we didn't know, after the destruction of Libya, the destruction of the revolutionary Libyan Jamahiriya led by Muammar Gaddafi. In 2011, that was the first operation of Africom along with NATO, destroyed that. After that, there was a hard time to see any bright spot in Africa. We didn't know where Africa was going to, it seemed neocolonialism was so firmly entrenched that we didn't know where a bright spot was going to be. And now we can look to these countries and what they're doing, taking back control of their resources, trying to deploy them and reorder things in a way that benefit and alleviate poverty and those kind of things in the country. Gold, uranium, whatever, oil, just renegotiate the term, so that things are not just plundering Africa. So that should be a source of inspiration for us. That should be a source of inspiration, just like the liberation movements during the Black Power movement and all that was something that we look to as in pride with Malcolm and the organization of Afro Unity. That type of thing is what we should be, how we should be looking at any movements against, and also we should be inspired, any movements against imperialism. We should also be inspired by the young people in the countries who are still under the thumb of neocolonialism, like in Kenya. Kenya, interesting enough, they have this movement that's going on there that is trying to take control of the government from these Commodore, from William Ruto and all of that has been trying to extend their rule over Africa and impose and accept the economic order of Western imperialism. Kenya was designated a major U.S. major non-NATO ally by the United States in last year. And this is a strategic partnership that gives benefits to this comprador class and enhance military and financial cooperation is what that means. Now, they're still looking down on them paternalistically. You can't be NATO. You can't be one of the Western European, but we can make you a little puppy, a little pet project of ours. And as long as you keep the back door open for us to exploit Africa. But on the ground, there is this massive movement. Young people are being killed and whatnot, but they're still standing strong against the compradors. And so this is happening also in Ghana and Sudan and other places. And so in the United States, we should be understanding what's happening on Africa. We should be in Africa. We should be understanding that those who have their boot on our neck here within the United States and within Haiti or wherever our people are the same people that are have to keep Africa down, and that our liberation part and parcel is dependent on us being able to help Africa liberate from imperialism.
And you mentioned those nations, the Alliance of Sahel states, the three, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, have kicked out Africom, and they're the nation that colonized that region, France as well. So this is a positive sign of possibilities for the African continent. So I suppose one of the reasons to have the month of action is also to educate people here about some of those changes that are so positive.
Mm-hmm. It's about those changes that are so positive, because we actually, Malcolm X said it better, a long time ago, in terms of you can't hate, because what the United States does, and just France and all of them have does to Africans, particularly those of us who are outside of the continent, is impose on us inferiority complexes. And so that we are ashamed of association with Africa. We look at the conditions of Africa and don't understand that it was an underdevelopment based on colonialism, and become ashamed and say, well, we're not African, and became to hate ourselves. And Malcolm X says, you can't hate, we hate anything that has to do with Africa. We can't hate the roots of a tree and not hate, the tree. So that's our roots. So we can't also, so it induces a self-hate. So we have to begin to understand what caused the conditions of Africa, and that we also have to begin to draw inspiration from the movements that are standing up to fight against it. There's a lot of things, I wanted to get into some of the stuff like Somalia. If we look at Somalia, and people will not understand what's happening with Somalia, that the United States has created, it's been cast into what a lot of people refer to as the forever wars. with them thinking we take for granted, it's become normalized that Somalia is in a state of, war against al-Shabaab and whatnot. And the benevolent U.S. comes and Africom comes to help them, Africom, and then we end up becoming accomplices, if we're not careful, accomplices in our own oppression or in the oppression of African people when we join these militaries, U.S., France, or whatever military. And that they drone bomb regularly Somalia. Regularly. I set to get Google alerts of anything that happens has to do with Africom, right? And there's regular Google alerts about them. And what they do is, this is what the role of the Commodores. And this not just in Somalia, they've done it in the Congo and whatnot, where they're in quote unquote invited by the rulers, of a particular country, the so-called the leaders. So they're not ruling anything. And that as long as they can say they are operating at the behest of the so-called leader, then no matter what they do, who they kill with their bombs or anything, it becomes justified. They've just in this year alone, they've launched over, 80 airstrikes in Somalia. That's a number that's even gone over the Trump's first term. And I don't even think Trump's first term exceeded what the Biden administration had done after that, if I'm not mistaken. And this is a bombardment of, what predator drones, bombardment of drones, and that Africom has said, well, we're not going to share casualty estimates, assessments of civilian harm. They just refuse to do that, and say, well, that's not something we do. So that means that there've been studies to show that these types of actions are what's aggravating and creating the violent extremism on the ground. It's the resentment of what's happening and just dispowerment. And so, these are the kind of things that we really need to understand so that we're not being accomplices to the domination and the destabilization of our own homeland, and then understand that that's connected. The liberation of our homeland is also connected to changing the miserable conditions we face here within the United States.
And as we close, remind our listeners again how they can find out about the International Month of Action Against Africom.
The webpage, blackallianceforpeace.com/Africom. That's AFRICOM 2025. And there you can find almost everything that we're doing. Toolkits, the webinar that we had, the things that are people doing around the country around it, and being able to endorse it.
Thank you so much for joining me, Netfa.
Thank you, Margaret.
And that was Netfa Freeman, co-coordinator of the Black Alliance for Peace Africa team, discussing the International Month of Action Against Africom.
True as gold to comma green, we steady on the rise. Digging truth from ancient scenes, we open blinded eyes. Rhyme sharp like pirates' lines, we break the bondage tight. Kanji speaking revolution, keep the fire burning. Shield drums guide our stride, we march with purpose proud. No more silence, we collide, our voices thunder loud. Politics and history, we stitch them in every verse. From Pharaoh's throne to Yaoundé streets, we claim the Kanji verse.